A security guard struggles to catch JD Vance's attention in a fleeting, unexpected moment, but the bold way he acts immediately afterward leaves the entire nation stunned. This isn't just news. It's a story of opportunity, readiness, and the worth of forgotten people. What happens next will leave you speechless. Now back to the story. Every night, dressed in his deep blue uniform, Ryan Carter stood in silence before the Ohio State House. Once he had been a soldier, a man who had given 10 years of his life to the military. The battlefield was behind him, but discipline and duty still ran through his veins. And yet, here, among these towering walls of power, he was invisible. Politicians, officials, and wealthy businessmen walked past him without a glance. When he greeted them, they barely nodded, if they acknowledged him at all. He had once been a man who sacrificed everything for his country. But when he returned, he found himself discarded. No opportunities, no direction. Only this job, enough to pay the bills, but offering nothing beyond that. Every night he stood guard, watching as powerful figures entered the grand halls to make decisions that would shape the world. Decisions he would never be a part of. And every time a politician or businessman walked past, a thought flickered through his mind. If my life had taken a different turn, could I have been one of them? But like every other night, Ryan stayed silent. He lowered his gaze, held his position, and fulfilled his duty. He had no idea that in just a few hours, his life would take a turn beyond anything he had ever imagined. At midnight, a convoy of black vehicles rolled into the driveway. Headlights swept across the pavement, reflecting against the towering glass windows. Ryan didn't need a second look. He knew exactly who had arrived. Senator JD Vance. The man had been here many times before, but he had never once acknowledged Ryan's presence. This time he stopped, and he looked directly at Ryan. Standing tall, Ryan held his gaze as the convoy neared the entrance. The car door swung open. In an instant, the security detail moved into position, forming a protective perimeter. JD Vance stepped out. He was clad in a dark suit, exuding an air of authority. Confidence radiated from his every movement. Ryan had seen that look before many times. This was not the first time he had watched JD Vance enter the Ohio State House. But tonight, something felt different. Still, Ryan remained as he always did, rigid, professional. Then, just as Vance reached the entrance, he stopped, and he turned toward Ryan. "How's the shift going, son?" For a split second, Ryan hesitated. In all his years working here, no one in Vance's position had ever spoken to him. Every day, powerful people passed by, but he did not belong to their world. He quickly composed himself. "All is well, sir." Vance nodded. He studied Ryan Carter, his sharp gaze assessing something unseen. "You served in the military, didn't you?" A brief flicker of surprise crossed Ryan's face. There were no insignias, no visible signs of his past. Only his posture and the disciplined air about him. And yet, Vance had noticed instantly. "Yes, sir. I served for 10 years. Vance nodded slowly. 10 years, that's a long time. And now, here you are. Something tightened in Ryan's chest. It wasn't mockery, but to hear it spoken aloud, that after everything he had done, after all he had sacrificed, he was now just a security guard, was a hard truth to swallow. "I'm responsible for the security of this building, sir." Vance didn't break eye contact. Then he gave a small, knowing smile, not condescending, but as if he had just realized something interesting. "Do you think this building is truly secure?" The question made Ryan pause. It wasn't something just anyone would dare to ask. "I believe we're doing the best we can, sir." Vance tilted his head slightly. "Doing your best doesn't mean it's enough." He stepped closer, his voice calm but laced with challenge. "If you had the power to change the security system here, what would you do differently?" A whirlwind of thoughts raced through Ryan's mind. He had noticed the weaknesses in the system long ago, the blind spots in the surveillance cameras, the entrances that weren't secure enough, the vulnerabilities that no one seemed to care about. But he was just an anonymous security guard. Who would listen to him? Yet, the man standing before him now wasn't just another powerful politician. He was listening. "There are a few areas I believe could be improved, sir." Vance nodded, but this time it wasn't just a perfunctory nod. Good. His gaze locked onto Ryan's, cold and calculating. Prepare a detailed report on these vulnerabilities. I'll be back. Then he turned and walked away, leaving Ryan standing there, his mind reeling. Was this a real opportunity? Ryan understood that this was more than just a casual conversation. Vance's words, prepare a detailed report, I'll be back, weren't just a challenge. They were an opening, an opportunity to prove himself. And Ryan wasn't going to waste it. Identifying problems was easy, but if he wanted to be heard, he needed solutions. Not vague ideas, real, practical, immediately actionable strategies. So every night after his shift, Ryan didn't go home. He seized every opportunity to analyze the security system of the Ohio State House. But instead of merely listing its flaws, he asked himself, if I were an intruder, how would I break in? If I wanted to bypass security, which weaknesses would I exploit? How can these issues be fixed without excessive costs or operational disruption? He didn't just observe, he simulated attack scenarios. He pinpointed the exact blind spots the cameras failed to cover. He tested the response time of the security team during incidents. He mapped out the overlooked routes and access points no one questioned. And he didn't stop there. Drawing from his military experience, he delved into advanced security protocols, studied surveillance technology, and researched how government agencies safeguarded their facilities. He wasn't just compiling a list of problems. He was building a comprehensive security plan. And then, 3 weeks later, the moment arrived. JD Vance returned. Just like before, he stepped out of his car and stopped in front of Ryan. I told you to prepare some ideas, didn't I? Ryan took a deep breath, tension coiling in his chest. Yes, sir. Good. Let's hear them. Ryan didn't waste words. He pulled out a security diagram, highlighting the vulnerabilities he had identified, along with real-world risk scenarios he had analyzed. He got straight to the point. The West Gate camera has a blind spot. If someone wanted to slip in undetected, that's the route they'd take. Additionally, there's a security gap during shift changes at night. An ideal window for an intruder. And more concerning, employee access cards have unrestricted clearance. If stolen or cloned, anyone could get inside. JD Vance nodded. So, what's the solution? Ryan responded without hesitation. It's simple, sir. Install a low-angle camera to eliminate the blind spot. Adjust the shift schedule to prevent security lapses. Restrict employee access based on their actual job requirements. This way, we don't just detect threats, we neutralize them before they happen. His voice was steady, every word deliberate. He knew an opportunity like this wouldn't come twice. Vance listened in silence. Behind him, a few members of his security detail exchanged glances. They hadn't expected a security guard to deliver such a sharp, detailed analysis. When Ryan finished, Vance studied him for a long moment. Then he smiled. Well done. There was nothing perfunctory about his tone. And in that moment Ryan knew. He had done it. At that exact moment, an intrusion occurred. The alarm blared, a piercing sound slicing through the air. Surveillance monitors flickered wildly, flashing red warning lights signaling an emergency. A frantic voice crackled over the radio. Unauthorized entry. Unknown subject spotted in a restricted area. The control room erupted into chaos. Security personnel rushed toward the monitors, eyes glued to the surveillance feed. A shadow moved swiftly down the southwest corridor. Ryan froze. His heart stopped for a beat. It was the exact vulnerability he had identified in his report. A senior security officer frowned, skepticism laced in his voice. Might be a system glitch. Run a check first. A glitch? No way. Ryan stared at the screen, a gnawing unease creeping into his chest. The man in the footage wasn't moving like a typical intruder. He wasn't searching. He wasn't hesitating. He walked with purpose, straight toward a specific location, like he already knew the way, like he knew exactly what he was doing. And that told Ryan this wasn't a coincidence. He grabbed the radio, his voice firm. We have a real intruder. I need a response team at the southwest corridor now. For a moment the control room went silent. People hesitated, glancing at one another. Then, a voice cut through the tension. Calm, measured, but absolute. Do as he says. Ryan turned. JD Vance stood at the doorway, his gaze sharp, his expression unreadable. And just like that, no one questioned it. Within 30 seconds, the tactical team arrived. They swept the corridor empty. No sign of the intruder. The door was still locked. No signs of forced entry. A security officer spoke up, his tone tinged with doubt. Might have really been a system error. But Ryan wasn't convinced. He stepped forward, crouching low, his eyes scanning every inch of the floor. Something wasn't right. The surface should have been smooth, untouched. But near the base of the wall, there was a faint scratch. One that hadn't been there before. Ryan ran his fingers along the floor panel. The texture was slightly uneven, just enough to be off. He looked up, his eyes burning with certainty. Pull this panel up. A security officer knelt down, pried it open. Beneath it lay a small black device, its compact design fitting snugly in the hidden compartment. Planted there intentionally. A low, sharp voice muttered behind them. Son of a bitch. That's a data extraction unit. This wasn't just a break-in. This wasn't some petty thief looking for documents or valuables. Someone had tried to breach the building systems, and if they hadn't caught it in time, the consequences would have been unimaginable. Ryan held his breath. He had just proven himself. Not with theories. Not with a neatly typed report. With action. Slowly, JD Vance turned to him. He didn't speak right away. He simply watched Ryan, as if etching this moment into memory. Finally he spoke, his voice calm, but heavy with meaning. You see, I told you. Doing your best doesn't mean it's enough. In the control room no one said a word. No praise. No congratulatory pat on the back. But Ryan understood. Vance had recognized that he was more than just a security guard. And then, Vance said something that lingered in Ryan's mind long after he left the room. I'm going to bring your story into the light. The words echoed in Ryan's head as he walked away. What did he mean by that? Was it a compliment? A recognition of his ability? Or just a passing remark? Vance had made no promises. He hadn't mentioned a promotion, a job offer, or anything concrete. Just a vague statement. Yet one weighted enough to leave Ryan restless. He wanted to believe this was a turning point, but he couldn't ignore the possibility that it was just a fleeting moment. For all he knew, by tomorrow, everything would go back to the way it was. He'd still be a security guard, still standing at his post outside this building, still invisible to the powerful figures who walked past him every day. The thought unsettled him. That night, Ryan couldn't sleep. He sat alone in his small office, the dim glow of his desk lamp illuminating stacks of notes, building schematics, and hastily scribbled markings from long, tireless nights. He had done all of this simply because he knew it mattered, not because he expected recognition or an opportunity. But now, with Vance paying attention, everything suddenly felt much more serious. If Vance truly intended to bring his story into the light, it would change his position entirely. But in which direction? He could be acknowledged for his strategic thinking and sharp instincts, or he could be exposed for every shortcoming, every flaw, every gap in his knowledge. Was he actually good enough? Ryan leaned forward, elbows on the desk, fingers tightening into fists as an uneasy tension built in his chest. He wasn't a security expert. He didn't have a degree in cybersecurity. He had never advised at this level. He was just a former soldier, a security guard, a man who had never been given the chance to prove himself beyond the mundane routines of his daily post. So if this opportunity came, would he be ready to take it? Or would it slip through his fingers like a passing wind, leaving him to realize, too late, that he was never truly meant for something greater? He could ignore all of this. He could return to his familiar life, do his job, and avoid the pressure that came with it. No one expected anything from him. No one demanded that he be better. But if he did that, would he ever forgive himself? He had fought his whole life for a moment like this, and now that it had arrived, he hesitated. Was that fear? Or was it the caution of a soldier trained to assess risks before taking action? He didn't have an answer, but he knew one thing for certain. If the opportunity came tomorrow, he couldn't let it pass. He had to be ready. The next morning, Vance held a public press conference. The room was packed. Camera flashes flickered relentlessly, lenses panning across the stage, capturing every moment. The air was thick with anticipation. Everyone assumed this would be a standard policy announcement, just another speech about security, one of hundreds before it. They had no idea JD Vance was about to do something unprecedented. He stepped up to the podium, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. Taking a measured breath, he placed both hands firmly on the stand and spoke. His voice steady, each word deliberate. Today, I'm not standing here to talk about myself. I'm not here to discuss policies I've drafted. I'm here to talk about a man we all should have known long ago. I want to introduce you to Ryan Carter. A ripple of murmurs spread through the audience. Ryan tensed. He had been standing backstage, assuming he was merely an observer, just another security guard stationed behind the walls of power. But as soon as Vance spoke his name, the entire room turned toward him. A staff member motioned for him to step forward. He hesitated, then moved. With each step onto the stage, he felt the weight of 100 reporters' eyes, of politicians, of millions watching live across the country. Vance turned slightly, addressing the crowd. Ryan is not a politician. He's not a senior security official. And that is precisely what makes his story so important. The room fell silent. Because he is one of you. A hush settled over the crowd. He is a man who served his country, who returned from war and found himself lost in the shadows. He is a security guard, doing a job that seems ordinary but is, in reality, one of the most critical, protecting the very places where this nation's most consequential decisions are made. Some people in the audience began nodding, and when the security system had gaps, when no one would listen, he didn't complain. He didn't point fingers. He stood up, took it upon himself to study, to find solutions, to fight his own self-doubt in order to do what was right. That is what men like him do. But there's a problem. His voice lowered, his gaze sweeping over the room. We have grown used to overlooking people like Ryan. Silence fell over the crowd. We've grown used to listening to experts, to policymakers, to people with prestigious degrees. But I'm here to tell you the truth. There are far too many Ryan Carters in this country. Intelligent, hard-working, honorable people who have never been given the chance to be heard. Today that changes. A murmur rippled through the audience. Vance continued, his tone sharpening. I am announcing a security reform initiative, not based on theories from a committee of experts sitting in an office, but on the real-world experience of those on the front lines. The security report written by Ryan Carter will serve as the foundation for the changes we propose. His recommendations will be incorporated into our state's security framework, and we will work to expand these improvements nationwide. The room erupted. A flood of questions burst from the press corps. Did you just say a security guard will shape security policy? Has this initiative been approved by the necessary agencies? Is this even feasible? Some people were intrigued. Some were skeptical. But no one could deny that the name Ryan Carter had just become the center of attention. The doors to the conference room swung shut, muffling the echoes of shouted questions and flashing cameras. Ryan felt the weight of a nation's gaze on him, waiting to see what he would do next. Days ago, he had been nothing more than an anonymous security guard standing outside this building. Now, his name was in headlines, debated on television panels, the subject of both admiration and scrutiny. The light that Vance had cast on him didn't just bring recognition. It placed a heavy burden on his shoulders. He was no longer an outsider. He was in the center of it all. Could he prove he was worthy? Was this the moment that would change his life? Or was it just a fleeting spark before he was pushed back into the shadows? There was no time to hesitate. And Ryan knew he could not afford to let this slip away. In just a few days, Ryan Carter went from being an unknown security guard to a name recognized across the nation. Through JD Vance's connections, he was put forward for a state-level security advisory role, with discussions of potential consideration for a federal position. The story spread like wildfire, becoming a media sensation. How could an ordinary security guard become a security advisor? How could a veteran, once forgotten by society, now be at the center of national discourse? Public opinion was divided. Some hailed him as a symbol of the working class, competent, capable people who had simply never been given the chance to rise. Others were skeptical, dismissing him as nothing more than a media narrative, a figure elevated for political gain. But regardless of praise or doubt, one thing was undeniable. Ryan Carter had changed the game. Vance had not just given Ryan an opportunity, he understood him. Because he had once been a Ryan himself. A kid who grew up in hardship, underestimated, fighting to carve out his place in the world. Ryan's story isn't rare. Vance said in an interview following the press conference, "There are thousands of Ryans out there. Men and women with talent and ability who have never been given the chance to prove themselves. Our job is not to hand them opportunities. Our job is to make sure that when they stand up, when they are ready to seize an opportunity, we don't ignore them." Ryan wasn't lucky. He was ready. And when the moment came, he didn't hesitate. This story is a reminder that opportunities can come unexpectedly, but only those who are prepared can seize them. Have you ever faced a life-changing opportunity? Would you dare to step up when no one believes you deserve it? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your story might inspire others to take their own chances. If you found this story meaningful, don't forget to share it with your friends and family to spread the message of readiness, the value of overlooked individuals, and the power of the right opportunity at the right time. Thank you for supporting the channel. Please like, share, and subscribe to receive the latest updates. The stories are collected from various sources and do not represent any individual or organization. They are shared with the intention of spreading human values in life and have been rewritten with the support of AI. If there are any mistakes, kindly overlook them with understanding. Wishing you all the best in life.